Northern Brewery takes you where home brewing and craft brewing meet. From pro breweries to home breweries, we live and breathe beer. Craft beer celebrities, homebrew luminaries, brew sessions, and most important of all, lots of great beer. You are watching Brewing TV.
Welcome to Brewing TV. I am your host, Chip Walton. I'm not sure what I'm doing today is even going to become an episode or a short pour or anything, but I am brewing in my kitchen on a Saturday. What I'm doing today is my third version of a chocolate stout that I've made 3 years in a row, inspired by Microbrewed Adventures by Charlie P., the man, not the dog. He has a recipe in here for Brooklyn Brewery's Chocolate Stout, a smaller one than I think is commercially available these days. It's kind of like a 5.5 alcohol. So the first year I made that recipe to the T, exactly like he did. And then as I was bottling, going into the bottling bucket from secondary, I thought to myself, this would be an interesting beer to try to ice some of it, a small portion of it. So that's kind of the trick, the tip, the nugget, if there is one for this episode for the most part, is going to be the fact that I'm going to try to ice this. Let me tell you really quickly about the beer. It is 6 pounds of dark liquid malt extract, 1 pound of light, golden light, dry malt extract. I'm going to use 5 ounces of the unsweetened baker's chocolate. I'm going to use homegrown Fuggles from this past year's harvest. A couple months ago we pulled them from our old house. About an ounce and a half of that's going in for first wort hopping, about an ounce and a half of going towards the end. The bittering hop for this brew is Northern Brewer pellets. They're about 9.5 alpha acid. This beer started like most extract with specialty grain beers. I steeped the specialty grains in about 2 gallons of water. I also put in the first wort hops during that original steep. So you can see there's 2 bags, about 30 minutes at 155. Once I rinsed both of those out, I pulled the hop bag out so it wouldn't be in the way for adding the liquid malt extract and the dry. In the past, I've just thrown these Baker chocolate squares straight into the boil and stirred them to get them melted. What I decided to do based on the instructions inside of the actual chocolate package is you can microwave these to melt them. So I put the 5 bricks, the 5 squares, into the microwave for about 1.5 minutes. You can see it turned into just this beautiful, dark, muddy, slick and silky chocolate mixture. I then took a little bit of that near boil wort that has the liquid and dry malt extract in it, took a cup of that and added it in to kind of help loosen it up and get it off the sides and make it more pourable. And then I just, obviously the heat was killed for both the malt extract and this chocolate edition. I killed the heat, stirred it in real good. Once I felt like it was dissolved enough, I added heat, and then I put that original first wort hopping hop bag back in. So what I can report to you right now, before I put in my first boil addition of 1 ounce Northern Brewer pellet hops, is that that wort tastes awesome. It is very sweet, it's very chocolatey, kind of like the left behind residue at the bottom of a really good cup of homemade hot chocolate. That's exactly what it tastes like. So that's pretty exciting. In go the Northern Brewers. I did recently get a outdoor propane burner and pretty much all the stuff I need to go all green. So that'll be happening hopefully here in the next couple weeks. But since this beer, time is of the essence and I want to make sure I don't mess anything up with it, extract is what I'm definitely comfortable with. I'm gonna knock this one out. Old school style stovetop. If you don't own this book, you should. It is awesome. Charlie P. takes you all over the country, takes you all over the world. Great, like, narrative, fun beer travel stories. And then the whole back half is just awesome recipes. A lot are his, inspired by trips. A lot are his, inspired by commercial brews. There's even a handful that are basically scaled down versions of commercial beers that are available still, or better yet, ones that aren't available anymore. It's just a really great book. You can tear through it really quick and it feels like you're taking a bunch of brewery tours all over the world. It's awesome. I love this book. I brewed a lot of beers from this book, man. I love it. Thank you, Charlie P. You are a gentleman and a scholar and a baller. We're about 15 minutes left in the boil. It's pretty much the same as most beers you've seen from here on out. We're gonna add a little bit more hops at 10. We're gonna cool it, we're gonna chill it, and I'm about to be in a huge hurry to get to an undisclosed location for another brewing TV shoot today. That's right, we do a lot of shoots on Saturday. This ain't a 9 to 5 thing. I'm gonna take it down to the basement, I'm gonna cool it, I'm gonna pitch Don Osborne's awesome California Common Lager Yeast Beast. I'm gonna ferment it, I'm gonna try to keep it at about 58 to 60, the lower end of that lager yeast, and a temperature my basement can definitely handle at this point. I think the most interesting, unique thing that I can show you will actually be once it's out of secondary and I'm getting ready to keg about 3.5 gallons of it for my family, and I'm going to take the other 1.5 gallons and do some fun icing with it, and I think that'll be the next thing that's actually worth seeing. So check back in a couple weeks. This beer will be ready to drink, it'll be ready to ice, my beard will likely be longer, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. All for brew, brew for all. See you in a minute. So welcome to the bridge, the middle part of the episode where the lines of continuity become very blurred and cross-sectional. Before I tell you what happened after the Chocolate Stout Brew Day, let me introduce the man, Zander Dixon. Zander, tell the fine folks who you are and what you do as it relates to homebrewing, craft beer, and what we're doing here today.
Well, primarily I just drink beer, so that's what brings me here. But I'm a chef, and I also am a connoisseur of wine. I sell wine wholesale, and never really was much of a beer drinker till I met this fella right here. And he got me involved in beer in a way that I'm involved with wine, and I find it a lot of fun.
So, full disclosure, the beers that sit before us right now are not the ones you just saw brewed back in December. That keg, because of me being in a big hurry for family visitors for the holidays, the whole thing got kegged, carved, served, drank up. Episode idea down the drain. But Zander was able to get in on that first batch on New Year's Eve. What was your impression of the beer that we just saw being brewed?
Well, I found it to be really complex. It separated into a lot of layers as it moved across the palate. The chocolate was sort of like the main line.
Yeah.
And that went right down the middle and across the center of the palate.
Right.
But then, as you began to let it move to the back of the palate, a lot of the volatiles began to expand, and that's where we get the fruit tones and the banana tones.
Fast forward to a month later, we're talking early February. Elsa and I, my wife and I, went on vacation. Zander and his wife were nice enough to take care of Charlie P, the dog, not the man, and they refused to take money as payment for this service. So what else could I offer? 5 gallons of chocolate stout, the second best legal tender one can think of. And actually, you were saying something interesting about it.
The Incans used to use cocoa beans as legal tender.
Full circle, man. So now we're going to go a little bit back in time and show the icing of Zander's Chocolate Stout.
First, let me tell you, this was one of the funkiest looking fermentations I've ever seen. The krausen was thick and muddy, looked like patches of chocolate pudding on top of mud pie wine. Very crazy. The beer fermented down to about 1020, which is where the first batch finished as well. Transferred to secondary for about a week, then it was time to rack about 4 gallons into a keg for Zander, and 1 gallon into a jug for the purpose of this icing experiment. Here's a look at the equipment I used on icing day. Some corn sugar for priming, an empty, clean milk jug, a small kitchen scale, a funnel that fits into the mouth of the bottles. In this case, I used some small flip-top or easy cap bottles. Before racking the beer out of the secondary fermenter, you want to get everything ready. So I made a solution of priming sugar. Using the rule of thumb that says 5 ounces of sugar per 5 gallons of beer, I measured out about 1 ounce. Remember, 4 gallons was getting kegged, only 1 gallon was going into the jug. I boiled 1 cup of water, added the sugar, made sure it was dissolved, then took it off the heat to cool. Down in the basement, I took the already cleaned milk jug and filled it with sanitizer solution. Gave it a good shake to make sure the foam covered the inside. I then racked the full 5 gallons into my keg. If I had had a partner on this day, they could have taken the siphon tube out of the keg and moved it into the jug for me.
but seeing as how I was doing this alone, I decided it would be smarter to rack the full amount into the keg than pull off that 1 gallon from the keg into the jug. You dig? Empty the sanitizer out of the milk jug, pour in the cooled solution of priming sugar water, proceed to rack 1 gallon of chocolate stout into the jug. Again, this would be an easier process with an extra set of hands. From here, the jug goes right into the freezer. In my past icing experiments, I've left the jug for as long as 8 hours to where the beer was literally dripping through the icy slush to get into the bottle. This time, it was only in the freezer for about 6 hours. It was not frozen solid, but was pretty stiff, so I pulled the jug and decided it was time to go.
Bottles have been sanitized, as has this funnel. The jug of chocolate stout has been frozen to who knows what percentage of ice versus liquid, but enough that it's not solid, that some juice slushes around in there. I'm going to open it up. This is just my very makeshift way of doing this. I'm just going to pour it in there. Already there's slush coming out. There's a lot of just liquid, but there's already pieces of ice that are kind of making their way. I think I overdid this bottle. That's why I brought the towel. So we got a little overflow there. That's alright, it's alright. Chocolate towel, never hurt nobody. Ah, one down. There's obviously other ways that you could do this that wouldn't involve so much splashing in this phase. I know one method that I believe is in Jamil's Brewing Classic Styles when he's discussing ice beers. Specifically, he's talking about an ice bock. He's talking about how if you have the capabilities, you could put a whole keg into some kind of walk-in freezer, cold storage freezer, I guess even like a meat freezer. Freeze that keg along the same lines of theory. You don't freeze it solid. Man, making a mess, y'all. You don't freeze it solid, but enough that you can put a racking king down the main tube of the keg and siphon from underneath or from the middle where it's as thawed as it's going to get. You steal that fairly thawed liquid out. So this is leaving a good bit of ice behind. I'm starting to think I maybe could have let this freeze longer, but I'm not going to be too picky about it for the sake of the experiment. I think this could have gone longer. In past experiments, this hasn't emptied itself quite this quickly, which leads me to believe that it still could have benefited from a little more freezing. I think I could have let it go another couple of hours, but it is what it is. So after cleaning up my mess, one thing I learned from this version of the experiment for sure is sanitize your bottles well in advance and get the foam out of there. You don't have to fear the foam as far as racking on top of it in general occasions, but in this case the foam was actually taking up enough room where I can't get these 100% full, which is going to leave an air gap. So once that dies down, I may pop these and fill them, or I may just see how it goes. Sanitize and let them drip dry a little bit in advance and get rid of that foam. I feel secure that I raised the ABV a couple of points. I mean, there's that much of the water that used to be in the beer left behind, so surely there's it's been heightened a little.
I left the jug out to see how much liquid would be left once all that ice melted. You see here, there was about 1/3 or maybe a little more left. The gravity of that thawed ice water was still 1020, which was the final gravity of the beer. I'm not really sure what to make of that.
So here we are, the big payoff. We're going to do tasting notes on Chocolate Stout Regular and Chocolate Stout Iced. You excited?
I am.
Zander,
You've been talking so long.
Zander also brought some awesome homemade goods. Real quick, tell us what our edibles are.
We have a salted smoked beef, which I think is going to work real well, especially with the iced. And we've got a rye berry bread and just some cheese. Simple cheese.
Some cheese. All right, let's dig in, man.
All right.
Regular chocolate stout. I had a little last night just to make sure that the keg even had beer in it. And I thought it's obviously like very chocolatey on the bitter chocolate side, but it's more chalky than I thought I remembered it being fresh.
I'm getting it about the same. I think the carbonation is down just a little bit in it, which I actually prefer. I also think that because the carbonation's a little softer in it right now, I'm just getting a straight dark cocoa. Cocoa and graham cracker, kind of.
And the only difference is between the one we had on New Year's Eve, the one that everyone saw being brewed had some homegrown fuggles mixed in with Northern Brewer. Because I'd used all the homegrown fuggles, that is the one thing that is not equal in this beer, is this is just some Northern Brewer pellets. So they are a little more fresh and a little more dependable as far as like what the alpha acid is. Homegrowns are kind of who knows what. And I feel that this is a little more bitter than that first one too. That first version seemed a little more desserty. This one seems more like a straight up pintable beer.
Absolutely, yeah. I would agree with that 100%. The other one too seemed a little maltier to me than this one.
Right. And that could be...
If that's the same thing or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the balance of if the hops start going up, unless you intentionally boost the malt up, the malt is going to relatively seem lower. Let's move on to this. I've been waiting for this.
Yeah, me too.
When Zander popped it, so it built carbonation, and it's creating a foam when swirled. So I do think the experiment as far as the priming sugars was a success. It instantly smells what? A bit sweeter.
Yeah, the chocolate takes on a much more molasses tone here. The yeast is really very subdued. Wow.
It's silkier to me. It doesn't seem as that dry and chalky.
Yeah, it holds together on the palate. You know, before it's iced, when it hits the palate, it immediately begins to spread and break across. But after the ice, I think it goes down in a much more soft, cohesive, singular flavor. I do think that the salt from that beef that you just ate is going to probably go really nicely with it. I do see this working really well with a wide variety. I think chilies would go really well with this too. Some red chilies.
In it? Or
No.
outside it?
Well,
throw it in it!
Food with red chilies. I know
Right.
you want to put it in there because beer makers want to put that stuff in everything. But
Not all of them.
you know, I kind of, in my nascent appreciation for beer, I kind of want to taste it, and I want to have it with food and sample it the same way that I sample wine, which is with food. I rarely will sample a wine without any food. You know, I always taste it like we just did up front first, and then I eat a few different things, something salty, something creamy, and something neutral like a bread. And I like to taste those things and see how they interact. The only thing that we're missing here would be something with some acid to it or some spice, hot spice to it. We have similar mouthfeel between coconut and this.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, this is almost beginning to get a little bit oily in the mouth.
Yeah, slick, totally. Dry coconutting. Put a muslin bag of coconut, sweetened or unsweetened.
Well, you might have a problem. That might end up being like suntan lotion.
Pina colada.
Yeah.
Roasted pina colada juice.
Again, you know, I think what you would eat with this might be better than what you might brew in it.
Yes. Once again, the voice of reason. Stop with that beer.
Oh, you're allowed to say
Oh, I'm going to beep it out.
Oh.
I'm going to say whatever you want, Xander. I should beep that out and be like, but he didn't really say it. Now, this wasn't a very strong beer to begin with, so by extracting X amount of it, I wouldn't assume that this jumped, you know, to 9 or 10%, but do you perceive alcohol at all in it?
I think this has at least got another % over this.
I'm not smart enough to do the math, so if you are, let us know on Facebook or YouTube comments, or come over to the BTV section of the Northern Brewer Forum, because I know there are ways to do this. I know we even have calculators on northernbrewer.com that can help me figure it out, but I don't have the patience for it. I've moved on. I'm not wasting a bottle of Eisbier Stout in order to take a hydrometer reading and put it up against a refractometer reading. I'm just not going to do it. What is getting taken away with the water? Obviously, we're freezing the first thing that'll freeze first, which is water. So what is going away with it? What's being left behind and what might be changed by doing that at a different rate. Say like take it to -50 as opposed to a freezer that's only -15.
Well, when you told me that you were making ice beer from this, and immediately we make ice wine. And the purpose of making ice wine is to concentrate the sugar and the basic flavor components and remove a lot of the water. So I think that's exactly what you're doing here. Of course it is exactly what you're doing here. If you were to take it to -50 and freeze it solid, you'd be freezing everything. And then as it would melt, the things that have the lowest melting point would become liquid first. And that's what you would be drawn. That would, well, not necessarily. Yes, alcohol is among them, but there are some other components that are even lower freezing point than alcohol, but they're probably trace. But what other esters, along with the alcohol, are gonna come out of solution first? You'd have to get someone who's done some heavy-duty analysis on the beer to figure out what those components are.
It's blown my mind. I mean, I've done a couple of icings, and I've always been like, why is that element still here? But, but the roastiness, I feel like, it's kind of gone away a little bit. It's almost like the roast went away with the water.
I think what's happening is that you're freezing some acids along with the water. They're in solution with the water, and not coming out the same way the alcohol and the sugar does. Because sugar freezes at a very low point too. So what we've concentrated here is the alcohol and any residual sugars that might exist in the beer. So we've concentrated those, we've removed the water, we've probably removed some of the acid, and the resulting perception by the elevated sugar level is that you've lost some of the roastiness, you've lost some of the acid, which is going to be your high tone flavors,
Right.
Because they're in there with the water, and you've intensified the alcohol and the sugar in this, and along with it the viscosity also. So that's going to give you that silkier mouth feel.
Some other beers that I've tried in the past that have iced really well is a couple of different versions of stout. I did a peppercorn rye that turned out really well. Our Northern Brewer Smashing Pumpkin Ale Kit ices extremely well because what's left behind, Smashing Pumpkin, it's basically an amber ale, but it's got your classic nutmeg, clove, cinnamon kind of mix.
You got spice in there.
Right, and that's what gets left behind. It's like pumpkin pie wine.
All of those spices are fat-soluble spices. There are fat-soluble spices and there are water-soluble spices. So now when you start talking about making an ice wine or an ice beer, when you freeze
water soluble, it's going to go out with the water.
It's going to go away with the water.
What are examples of water-soluble spices?
Water-soluble spices would be more toward the herbal end, so mint, sage, thyme. Your fat-soluble spices are all your spices that come from seed or the woody part of the plant, which would be cinnamon, peppercorns, cumin, coriander, although coriander is both fat-soluble and water-soluble.
When I originally thought of icing a beer, one of the things, I can't remember if I read it or someone told me, that said you don't want to ice hoppy beers because you're really going to accentuate the hoppiness to an unenjoyable extent. But I've read on a couple forums where people have done it. And the other day I found, this is silly, but a bottle of Widmer Brothers Nelson IPA, and it had been frozen in the back of my fridge to about the top third. I went ahead and poured what was left into one of these, and it was honestly one of the best beers I've had in the last month or two. That's what you get when you listen to people. You don't have as much fun. I know I drank my ice beer to completion. Still have half this. Not that that's a judge of what won a contest, if this was a contest, but which one of these would you prefer more of?
I'm drinking the ice. Although when I got here and I was thirsty, I was drinking the.
Yeah, cut up that bread, man. In summary, I'd like to thank Zander for giving me an excuse to make the second batch of beer, which became an ice beer, which allowed me to finish this episode. Big props to our main sugar daddy, Northern Brewer. You can see Brewing TV many places, YouTube, Vimeo, Blip, Facebook, Pinterest. But the only true way to support Brewing TV is to shop at Northern Brewer. And when you make that order, leave a little comment in the block that says, "We love Brewing TV. Thank you for putting it out there," because that truly does come back to us. For another episode, I'm Chip Walton,
Zander Dixon,
saying all for brew.
and brew for all.
Ice is nice.
Santé.
Twice as nice with ice.
All for brew and brew for all. Northern Brewer, Minneapolis, St. Paul. All for brew and brew for all. Northern Brewer, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Oh, that's right.
So now we're back. You just caught Xander stealing some food. Hey y'all, what's going on with it, man? What up? You got me burning my finger.
128 in a gallon.
And now eating some free hops from work.
Free hop from work, y'all! Woo!
So you're using barley? What's your primary grain?
Malt extract. Keep it real. Yeah, barley. Different grains concentrated into a syrup.
Okay, so what's happening is they're not sticking to anything really. They're getting solved by the alcohol. It's the oil in the seed that's getting solved with the alcohol in the beer. So it remains with the alcohol.
Wow. Spoonful of sugar.
Except this is hardly medicine.
This is daddy's medicine, don't you say that?
Well, it's medicine for the soul.
This is Daddy's medicine, don't you say that?